What is up, friends? My camera's dirty. It's better. What is up? What is up? We are back. It's Hops with Pop. First Hops with Pop since I don't know, January. And I am recalling how much this light sucks. Really got to upgrade my production quality here. All right. What's up? What's up? What's up? So let people trickle in here. Everyone can hear me. Let me know in the chat. As I promised on Twitter, we are drinking an American classic here, Budweiser, aka Bud Heavy, aka the king of beers. Oh, and god damn it, it's delicious after a day like that. All right. Well, you guys tell me what you want to do because we're probably gonna keep it short here, do about 20 minutes. Hopefully tomorrow's a little bit less crazy and I can get on a little bit earlier. Um, I can roll through my takes and we have less time for questions, or we can just jump right into questions, whatever you guys want to do. Let me know. Just talk. All right. All right. So let me just rattle off my takes. So basically, here's the situation. If you're not subscribed to The Athletic, we are currently doing a $1 a month deal. Click the link below. You get access to that. You get $1 a month for 6 months. That below is my JC Jackson take that I did right after they signed JC Jackson. But tomorrow morning and every morning this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I'll have a free agency reset. Those of you that were subscribed last year know I basically go through everything that you could possibly want to know to set you up for that day. It'll be up first thing in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, it'll be up. I'll go through all the moves that they made the previous day and what they mean. I'll go through all the moves they did not make and what they mean. I'll go through a thorough salary cap reset of where they stand in terms of cap space. And then every day I do a top 10 remaining free agents through the prism of the Chargers, not necessarily the top 10 period, but the top 10 fits for the Chargers. So that'll be up tomorrow morning. If you want to read that in the morning, make sure you subscribe right now using the link below, $1 a month for 6 months. So now we got that out of the way. What a day, what a week for the Chargers. Out of nowhere, last week, they trade for Khalil Mack, this year's second, next year's sixth. That's a fine trade. They take on a decent amount of salary, ended up being, about $63 million in salary. That's a contract that they can restructure. None of the remaining salary is guaranteed, but I don't know if that restructure will happen this year, just because they did give up draft capital to trade for Khalil Mack. They don't have a ton of leverage. I mean, you have um, for the player, they get, signing bonus up front. So there is some incentive there. So hypothetically, they could restructure, but if they do restructure, that signing bonus gets prorated over the remaining years of the contract. So you still have to pay. Obviously, you have to pay the player, but you obviously have to wear that money against the cap at some point. So it's just a matter of how all in are the Chargers this year. And if they are, they could restructure them that contract. They could also restructure Joey Bosa's contract. They restructured Bosa. That would jump to a $37 million cap hit next year. But it's the crazy part about all of this is all of a sudden the Chargers are operating like every other team in the league. All of these teams that push the cap and push their rosters to the absolute maximum to compete, what the Saints do, what the Rams do, even what the Chiefs do, to really push this thing as far as it can go and potentially, wear some nasty dead money and some tough cap situations in future years to try and set yourself up for the best opportunity now, which is it's just completely different. It's just never, ever how Tom Telesco has operated. He's never gone after these types of players. He's never traded picks for star veterans past 30. He's never done any of this stuff. Certainly not in my time covering the team. It's as aggressive as he's ever been. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening with Staley. So anyway, they go out, they trade for Khalil Mack. Now the Chargers have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack on the edges. They don't give up that much for him. It's more taking on the salary, which they can incur. It's a $17.75 million cap hit this year, which they can wear no problem. Now they're pushing up against it now, but that was really not an issue. So you really, at the end of the day, you're giving up a second round pick for a guy who still has a lot of good football in front of him, and a guy who's played some of his best football while playing under Brandon Staley with the Bears, obviously, in that 2018 season. So that starts there. Then today they go out and they spend top dollar on a cornerback. And I think the thought process here, as we sort of gone over after the combine, if you've been reading me, you know, Staley and Telesco both said that, listen, Asante Samuel Jr. can move inside and play the slot. He's the logical replacement there for Chris Harris, who they're going to let walk. And so that opened up the door for them to go pursue a top outside corner. That's exactly what JC Jackson was. And Staley said something really interesting at the combine. He said, listen, you can't play zone against these elite quarterbacks. With their mobility, they're going to find holes in your zone. It's going to be really hard to stay connected against these elite quarterbacks. You have to play man, particularly in known passing situations in third and long. And the Chargers tried to do that last year, and they couldn't. You go back to that Vikings game and the way Tavon Campbell just got absolutely abused by Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen in key third downs. They needed a guy who could show up in those situations. And so they went out and they got JC Jackson, a guy who thrives in man. The Patriots played the fourth most man in the league. They always play a ton of man. It's Bill Belichick. A hallmark of his defenses is playing a lot of man. He's been super productive. 25 interceptions in his 4 seasons in the league. Over the last 4 seasons, it's the most picks out of anybody. So you have the ball production. He's still 26, turning 27 in the fall. So you have the youth, you have the potential, and you have the fit as a man corner. And what it does is all of a sudden, Michael, it shifts up your depth chart. So instead of relying on Asante Samuel Jr. as exclusively an outside corner, you can move him into the slot. Michael Davis becomes your third corner. So now he's only coming on the field in sub packages. Tavon Campbell moves to your fourth corner and really is only going to be used in emergencies if you have a ton of injuries. Now, ideally, you go and draft another cornerback to compete there, and Tavon Campbell's fighting for a roster spot, and you might even have a better player there at your fourth cornerback spot. So that's the logic there of the J.C. Jackson signing. But this is not something that Tom Telesco does. He doesn't spend like this in free agency. He has never believed in finding cornerstone pieces through free agency. Now he'll take chances on some guys. Remember they signed Casey Hayward, but at that point it wasn't like Casey Hayward was an established player. The Packers let him walk. They thought he was a slot guy. The Chargers felt like he could fit on the outside. Gus Bradley gets hired, and all of a sudden Casey Hayward finds his way as sort of the cover 3 corner, really instinctive and sort of finds his way. But it's not like they splurged on Casey and paid top dollar for him. They found him at value, and he turned into a really great player. Brian Bulaga is a guy that they paid, a decent amount of money to, but that was sort of a stopgap situation. I don't think they thought Brian Bulaga was going to be a long-term answer. They knew he had injury history. So it's not like Tom Telesco believes in this. And he said explicitly in his press conferences publicly, like, listen, I believe in building rosters to the draft and using free agency to find supplemental pieces, but that's not a supplemental piece. You're signing JC Jackson to be your number 1 cornerback. So it's just like a huge deviation from how they've done business. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's happening with Staley now in the building. Now, part of it too is there's pressure, right? You have Justin Herbert on a rookie deal and they feel like they need to go out and they need to be aggressive to try and maximize the window. But this has Staley written all over it. And I think what it's coming down to is what we've talked about before in these live streams and what I've written about, right? Last year, it was you had to get Justin Herbert right. You had to make sure he continued to develop. And so what'd you do? You spent most of your cap space on offensive pieces. You went out and you signed Corey Linsley to the biggest contract at that point that had ever been given to a center. You signed Matt Filer to a market level contract at guard. You sign Ode Ibushi, right? You go and you sign Jared Cook as your top tight end. So they really invested in the offense. The only starter they brought in defensively was Asante Samuel Jr. in the draft, and they needed that. They did not have another starting outside cornerback. That was a necessity. They bring in Kyler Fackrell as a rotational edge rusher, but for the most part, they sort of neglected the defense, and they felt like, hey, listen, we got to get the offense right. And they got it right. And the offense was outstanding this year. Justin Herbert was an MVP candidate. He played out of his mind. A lot of that was the structure that they built around him, and particularly signing Corey Linsley. But they felt like, okay, we're going to give Staley the pieces that we have. We'll see what he can do with them. We think we can be an average defense with these pieces. It didn't turn out that way. They were a bad defense. And so you have all these players set to hit free agency on defense. I think the thought process was, if it doesn't work out this year, we have all this money coming off the books next year defensively, and we can really overhaul this thing and remake it and do a complete, makeover home edition, right? And that's what they're doing. So they go out, they sign JC Jackson, then they get Sebastian Joseph Day. That felt like a no-brainer, slam dunk signing the whole time just because of the way that SJD played for Staley in 2020. I mean, he was exceptional that season, particularly against the run. He's an outstanding run defender. And then Austin Johnson from the Giants. I mean, Not a splash signing, but a guy who's been really productive against the run. And he's played. He's been available. That's really important, right? So he's played every single possible game over the last 5 seasons, and that's what you're trying to find. Both those players are still relatively young, under 30. And so this is what it is. It's a makeover of the defense, and that's starting right now. Okay. So cap situation. Should we do that next? That was a lot. I think that deserves 2 sips. What do you think? Should we do a cap breakdown? Okay. So I wish I could like share my screen so I could show you my sheet, but I'm bringing up my sheet right now. The spreadsheet. You guys are hilarious. Every signing, give me the spreadsheet. So basically, the Chargers were at. Oh shit! I messed this up. There we go. So right, the Chargers were right around 56 million in cap space heading into free agency. That's what over the cap had it as. So basically, here's how I break it down. Of that 56 million, you've got a $14 million year one cap hit for Mike Williams on his extension. You've got a $17.75 million year one cap hit for Khalil Mack after the trade, $895K for Donald Parham's tender, $965K for Jalen Guyton's tender. Those are different because they've played a different number of years in the league, and the veterans and the minimum salaries are dependent on how many years you played. You've got the Dustin Hopkins extension that's a $1.92 million cap hit for this season. J.C. Jackson's deal comes out to $8 million in the year one cap hit for 2022. So those are all the ones that we have confirmed. Then next thing you do is you factor in your adjusted rookie pool, and basically during the offseason, only the top 51 cap hits count against the cap because you're adding so many guys. You have all these draft picks, and then you sign a bunch of undrafted free agents, and the rosters end up getting up to 90 players. So not all of those players count against the cap until cutdown day. From now until cutdown day, start of the league year until cutdown day, it is the top 51. So only the top 3 salaries, your top 3 picks in the Chargers case, would count against the cap. So you have about a little over 3 million for pick 17, a little over 1 million for pick 79, and then $921,000 for pick 121. Those 3 salaries would replace 3 salaries that are currently in the top 151, which are a bunch of it's Forrest Merrill, Michael Bandy. They're all at 825K. So you basically take those 3 draft pick salaries, you subtract the salaries that they're replacing, and you get your adjusted rookie pool, and that's 2,482,000. So that's factored in. That's taken away from the cap because you have to account for those draft picks, and then so I'm projecting these 2 cap hits because we don't have the contract details yet. But I looked at some comparable contracts for Joseph Day and Johnson. Joseph Day aligns pretty closely with the deal that Michael Brockers signed last year. 3 years, 24 million. Brockers had 11 million guaranteed. Joseph Day has 15, so it might be a little bit higher, but I'm kind of going on the low end just so that I don't overshoot it. And then Johnson's deal is kind of similar to the deal that Poona Ford signed last year with the Seahawks. He was 2 years, like around 12.5 million. Johnson's deal is up to 14 million. When that phrasing is used in a report, it usually means there's some incentives involved, and incentives don't count against the cap unless they're deemed like likely to be achieved. I still haven't gotten like official confirmation on what exactly that means. Like the league basically determines it, but I would guess that the deal is pretty comparable there. If you take away incentives, it'd probably be about 2 years, 13 million, 12.5 million. So using those comparable deals as sort of a benchmark, I have Johnson's cap hit at 2.5 million for this year, and then Joseph Day's at 3 million. I'm probably on the lower end of the spectrum, but I'm going lower just to give you guys an idea. So you add all that together, and then what I typically do is I'll budget $7 million for in-season moves, and that's just Dustin Hopkins, Andre Roberts, right? Those like the signings that you make during the season where you have to give them some cap space, or veteran minimum. And for guys that have been in the league as long as they have been, it's usually a little over $1 million. So you need $2 million in cap space to actually go out and sign those guys. That's what in-season budgeting is, and so typically I do 7 million. Now, Telesco has never, ever, in my time tracking his cap space, and that's been since I started covering the team in 2019, He's never ever dug into that in-season budget that I budgeted out for him. Right now, based on using the projected numbers for Johnson and Joseph Day, the Chargers are now digging into that in-season budget that I budgeted for them by $771,000. $771,511 to be exact. So, they're still cap compliant right now. But this tells me, right, if they're into that in-season budget, they could still push a little bit further and be fine. But this tells me that the Bulaga cut has to be coming because they have more things they need to do in free agency. You know, tight end, second running back, right tackle, right? Some things that they probably should address in free agency. And they don't really have the space to do it right now. And if they cut Bulaga, they get an additional 10.75 million in cap space. And that would get them back to, pretty much 10 million in spending space, accounting for that in-season budget. They could even dig into that budget a little bit more by 2-3 million, right? And then you're looking at about, between 10 and 13 million dollars in spending space. And, factoring in year one cap hits, that means they can re-sign Ode Ibushi, for example. They could go find a right tackle. They could potentially re-sign Justin Jones. And so that's why I feel like the Bulaga cut is coming. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. What I do know is that he's due a roster bonus on March 20th. They are cap compliant right now. So when the new league year starts, you have to be cap compliant. All of your deals become official. You have to be cap compliant at that point. With all the deals they've signed or agreed to, once those deals become official, they're still cap compliant without cutting Brian Bulaga. So they do have time. It's like not totally necessary. But if they wanted to agree to terms with more deals before the new league year starts, it would make sense to cut Bulaga just to give yourself that room, because really you're dealing with about $6 million in space, like space, not spending space. Like that is, they have 6 million until they hit the cap. So it feels like that's inevitable. I can't tell you why it hasn't happened yet. They could hypothetically, if they stick with the deals they've made right now, they'll be cap compliant when the new league year starts, and they would technically have until March 20th to cut him. If they don't get it done by then they have to pay him $2.5 million. And it does not feel like he's in physical shape to play professional football at this point in his career. And so I don't know why you would wait any longer, but you can. The Chargers can wait. They really have until that March 20th date. But if they want to give themselves more breathing room during this negotiating window, it would really make sense for them to cut Bulaga, clear that space, and give themselves room to maneuver. So I said I had 20 minutes, and I just talked for 20 minutes without taking any questions. So we'll go a little bit longer. So I'll do some questions now. So I'm seeing retirement, and so for Bulaga, retirement and cutting would be the same savings on the cap for this year, but he's not going to retire before that roster bonus is due, because he basically is giving up $2.5 million. Like he would just wait for the Chargers to actually cut him, because he could just wait until March 20th, take that roster bonus, and then retire, and the Chargers would have to go through like arbitration basically to get that bonus money back. So it'd be a whole nightmare. Restructure for Bulaga, that's like, I guess, it wouldn't be a normal restructure. It would be a pay cut. Those are different things. When you restructure a contract, you turn base salary into signing bonus and then prorate it over the length of the deal. Divide it over the length of the deal. So, like, for example, Joey Bosa has about a $21 million base salary this year. So the Chargers could hypothetically take 20 million of that 21 million, because he has to make the veteran minimum for the number of years he's been in the league. So these are all ballpark numbers. But they would take that 20 million and they would divide it over the final 4 years of the deal. So it'd be 5 million per year. And so 15 million of that would be deferred to the final 3 years of the deal. And that's where you get the cap space from. You get that $15 million in signing bonus that gets prorated. A pay cut is different. Now, sometimes it gets reported as a restructure when it's really a pay cut. So in Bulaga's case, the Chargers could be going up to Bulaga and saying, listen, we're going to cut you. and you're not going to get that roster bonus, we could restructure this thing. Right, restructure meaning we could, you could take a pay cut. We could cut you down to whatever it is, and we'd save that money on the cap if Bulaga agrees to it. If he doesn't agree to it, then you cut him. So different, but it would be a pay cut. That's the option that they have is, negotiating a pay cut with him. And that's what they did with Denzel Perryman in 2020. He signed that 2-year extension in 2019. Was injured. Was due to make I think it was like $8 million cap hit. They restructured the contract so that a lot of the base salary was turned into incentives. The incentives didn't count against the cap because they weren't deemed likely to be achieved. And so, that lowered his cap hit because he effectively took a pay cut because, money that would have been given to him base salary via game check was turned into incentives where he actually had to achieve things to get it. So that's just an example of what a pay cut would look like. So, for Bulaga, it could be the same thing where they turn a bunch of that stuff into, a bunch of the base salary into incentives. Like, hey, if you play X many snaps, we'll played any snaps the last 2 years. I guess that's possible. But I just don't know, like, even if he's playing on a veteran minimum contract, I don't know how that's like providing value for your team. Like I knew going into last year that he was going to get hurt in the first week of the season. Um, so I would not expect him to come back from a significant surgery like that and be able to play for the team this year. Okay, I'm cutting out a little bit. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Check, check. 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Check, 1, 2. Can everyone hear me? Good now? Good now? Everyone good? Everyone good? Everyone good? Everyone good? Can I get some spreadsheets in the chat? Spreadsheets in the chat. Spreadsheets in the chat. Let's go. Spreadsheets in the chat. I love it. Spreadsheets in the chat. I'm like a real YouTuber now. All right. I saw a question about the Derwin James extension. Just based on my conversations with the combine, I think that's going to happen next off season. But that is an option to create space if they want to. If they do extend Derwin, they could lower his cap hit. It's like $9.6 million right now. They could probably get it down much lower than that based on how they structure the contract. But it seems like both sides want to wait until next offseason. For Derwin, it would be more leverage because he'd be, potential hitting free agency. The Chargers could tag him next offseason as well if they wanted to delay it a little bit. And then for the Chargers, by doing it next offseason, they could, have another healthy year, making sure that Derwin, isn't, dealing with any more of these injuries that have sort of plagued his career. Everyone's asking Bobby Wagner. No, if they do resign, if they sign a linebacker, it'll be Kaiser. But I don't think Bobby Wagner's on the table. So Parham is back. Parham has been tendered. That was according to PFF, so that happened. Hopkins got re-signed to an extension. So among those, Justin Jones, Kaiser, Ibushi, and Roberts. I feel like they could re-sign Ibushi to a pretty cheap deal, like maybe $1.5 million, and they could fit that in, especially if they do the blogger cut. Kaiser, I get the feeling that Kaiser is not going to be coming back just based on what I think his market value is. Especially that contract that the Jaguars gave to that Falcons linebacker. That was insane money. I mean, that was over $15 million in average annual value. I mean, he had like 200 tackles last year, so he obviously had insane production. Kaiser wasn't necessarily there, but he was at 150 tackles. Had an outstanding season, young, up-and-coming player. I still think he's like an $8 to $9 million a year player. Like I think I settled on like 8.75. Right now, I don't see how the Chargers can fit that in. I think that probably changes obviously if they cut the logger, if they do any restructures with Bosa or extend Derwin or any of these things. Um, I think they get Fitabushi in. I think they get Roberts back pretty cheap, and then it depends what Justin Jones's market is. You guys know this. I love him as a player. I think he's fantastic. He's obviously had injury issues, and that's going to impact his market. But it feels like he's in that $7 million a year type range. I mean, some of these guys, top tier defensive linemen, were getting $10 million. I don't know if Jones is there. I don't know if he's necessarily at Joseph Day's level either. Joseph Day also, he missed a lot of time last year with a torn pec, so I guess similar in that regard. Joseph Day was a better player in 2020 under Brandon Staley than Jones has really ever been. But you feel like Justin Jones could end up in that maybe $7 million a year range. Right now, it's the Chargers are getting tight. So among Jones, Kaiser, and Nwosu, I think Jones is most likely to re-sign. I have him as my number one for tomorrow in terms of my top 10 free agents. That's just how I feel about him as a player. And I think, if you re-sign Jones, you added Joseph Day and Austin Johnson, you obviously have Tillery on the roster, and then you draft a defensive lineman. Maybe it's Jordan Davis in the first, but maybe it's someone else in the second round. There's the very deep defensive line draft. All of a sudden, you've got a really good group there. You've turned a weakness into a strength. And so that still makes sense to me. It's just a question of whether it can fit into the cap. But I could certainly see a scenario where all three of those guys walk. Kaiser, Jones, and Chenna. At this point, Chenna's pretty much gone. I mean, he tweeted as much on Friday. He said business is business. So. Oh, good call. I keep forgetting about the second rounder. So third rounder. Still potential to draft a defensive lineman there. So, but I always keep forgetting about that. Akeem Hicks, I think he's on the table if the money makes sense. He's in my top 10 tomorrow. So I've seen a lot of talk about this Keenan Allen's contract. So, people are getting at me about, what the Mike Williams contract means for Keenan. So they basically, there's a slight out next year. So there's certainly a possibility where this is Keenan's last year, but he's still really productive, and I don't think they necessarily would want to move on from him. They could save 16.3 million on the cap next year with a $5.4 million dead money charge. If they cut him, if they designated him post June 1, they would save 19 with 2.7 dead money. That's certainly tenable. That's also a situation where they could restructure, they could, negotiate a pay cut, that type of thing. So he's definitely on the roster this year. You sort of see how he performs. But you think about it, okay, say, they like a receiver at 17 and it's, Chris Olave, for example, Drake London, for example, draft that guy and, they move on from Keenan. You've got Josh Palmer, who's proven that he could probably fill into that role as a guy who can play inside and outside and be really good in the slot. That's certainly a possibility in terms of how this all shakes out. But he's going to be on the team this year. It's just next year they do have a slight out in the contract. 2024 is the more clear out of the contract, but they can make it work next year. So. Damn, we got 500 people in here. Let's go. YouTube sensation. Hops with Pop is back in a big way. Take a screenshot of this. 500. Who said the Chargers don't have any fans? Spreadsheets in the chat. All right. Steven Anderson, I think they re-sign him. I didn't include him in my top 10 just because I don't know if he's like I don't know if he's that good of a player. He's definitely important to them. But I feel like they could bring him back on a relatively cheap deal. We'll see. We'll see how that shakes out. Um, we'll see how his market shakes out. But he was a really nice fit in Lombardi's scheme last year. Just sort of playing that H back type role where he was playing some fullback, playing inline, lining up split from the formation, um, and you feel like that role is really nice for him. They do have Gabe Neighbors, but they ended up going with Steven Anderson in that role. So I feel like they'll bring him back. And if you can go into my depth chart that I wrote on Friday, just a little recap of everything and the way that Lombardi talked about Steven Anderson and what he meant to the offense. Um, I would expect him to be back. All right, we're 30 minutes in. I'll do two more questions. Right tackle options. So Morgan Moses played for the Jets last year. You've got Riley Reef, who played for the Bengals and got hurt last year, and then Darrell Williams was cut today, who played right tackle and some guard for the Bills. He really was a nice player at right tackle for them. And if the money makes sense, he could be there. But those are sort of the three guys that I have listed in my top 10. And then yeah, Josh brings up a good point that Lyle Collins is potentially going to get cut. So um, we'll see if that comes to fruition tomorrow. If he's out there, that certainly becomes an option. What direction do I think they go at 17? Um, after what happened today, I'm kind of leaning towards receiver. I mean, if Jordan Davis it's there, it'd be tough to pass up. But with the way they're investing in the defense, it feels like they're setting themselves up to potentially take a receiver at 17 if they feel like that's a guy that's really going to elevate this offense to not just the fourth best offense in the league, but the number one offense. But they really could go best player. I don't think anything they've done. So far this week has sort of precluded them from doing anything. They could take an edge rusher. They certainly could take a corner, um, receiver, defensive lineman. So I think they've set themselves up where they could really go in any direction. That's sort of the position that you want to be in going into the draft. Wide receiver, cornerback, edge, DT. I think that's pretty much spot on. Yeah. All right, guys. We're gonna call it there. I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll do this again. Hopefully, it's a little bit of a quieter day, so I can get on here a little bit earlier. Um, oh yeah, and they could also go offensive tackle at 17. If the right guy's there, don't rule that out. So really, like I was saying, they can really go in any direction. But we'll wrap it up there. I appreciate everyone joining. We're up at 530 people in here. That's pretty incredible. I appreciate all you guys watching. Make sure that if you're not subscribed to The Athletic, you click the link below. Okay, $1 a month deal for the next 6 months. The best deal you're going to get all year. So click that link and subscribe right now. I'm going to have at least three stories publishing every day, every morning. Starting tomorrow morning, I'll have my free agency reset where I go over all the moves the Chargers made, they didn't make. I do a detailed dive into the cap, top 10 remaining free agents for the Chargers. So if you're not subscribed and you want to be plugged into the Chargers, make sure you click that link below and subscribe. And as always, everybody, appreciate it. We'll talk tomorrow. Peace out.